I actually found this book at an estate sale, and I said this will be perfect. So, let's get going. Hey, here I am. Down here. Sorry, I'm a little out of breath after climbing that E, but you were going to turn the page and you didn't even see me, and I'm the one who's supposed to tell you the story. Oh, my name is Stella, by the way, and it's a story that you got to hear because kids like you and kids like me, all these kids are shrinking, see, and I don't think anyone even notices. Oh well, anyway, now you can turn the page. This is where I live. It seems okay, but there's a lot wrong here. Look closely or you'll miss something just like you almost missed me. You see some of the wrong things happening? What do you see happening? Okay? Okay? Anything else? Look at the students. Anything with the students? What do you see?
Go on the roof and
Okay. Anything else, you guys back there? It might be a little harder to see.
I see a crack near the pond.
Okay. Now remember all the things that we saw. Here's my school. You know, I could hardly wait to go to school when I was little. Well, I mean little like when I was younger, not little like now that I've shrunk. I was so excited on my first day. I didn't need any alarm to wake me up. No way. I felt so big and so important and so full of wonderful ideas that I thought I would burst just like a balloon. School would be an adventure where I could do anything and everything. But something went wrong. As you can see, there are a lot of problems at my school. Some grown-ups say it's because kids just didn't want to learn, but I know that's not true. Just look at Christopher. He's the kid on the next page. The same thing is happening to him that happened to me. What do you see happening in these classrooms? What's happening here? Yeah.
Fight.
Fight. What's happening in some of the other ones? What are the kids doing? Go ahead.
Asleep.
Falling asleep? You see something different? No?
Someone's in detention.
Yeah, looks like it, right? Christopher has been getting smaller every day. He sits at his desk and he watches his teacher write on the board. He watches the letters and numbers being written and erased. Boring, he thinks. Boring, boring, boring. Christopher doesn't think of anything except how boring everything is. He is so bored he doesn't even notice he's shrinking. You know, Christopher is really smart, but his grades aren't that great. Weird, huh? He's just shrunk too much, and now he's about to fall right through the cracks of the schoolroom floor. Hi, Christopher, I said. You've fallen through the cracks. Christopher was a little slow to answer. Huh? Asked Christopher. Do I know you? Did you say something? Yes, I did say something, I replied. I've watched your sneakers all morning. Your shoestrings glow in the dark. You looked pretty bored in class, but now you're out of there. In answer to your other question, you know me now. I'm Stella. I think he was trying to register my name in his memory when suddenly his eyes got big. Wait a minute. I am out of class? Christopher looked like he was about to scream with joy. Awesome! Yeah, it's awesome, all right, but not like you're thinking. After all, I've been here a while. Look around. Do you really want to be here? I sat back and watched Christopher take in the place. The gloomy walls, the silence that made huge echoes of shouts or crying, and the long dark shadows, if they really were just shadows. Falling through the cracks felt creepy and lonely. The other kids down here keep to themselves. That's why I made up my mind to make Christopher my friend before he got scared or mean or quit talking like the others. I see what you mean, Christopher admitted, looking around. He looked up at all those dangling feet of the kids who were shrinking. the kids who would end up falling through the cracks, just like Christopher and me. He looked back at the children in the lower grades and wondered why a kindergartner was already waist deep on his first day of school. He looked ahead at the children in the upper grades and noticed that even some of the smart kids were beginning to slip through. He looked at all the kids who had already fallen, then he looked at me. "This place has some problems," he said, "but going back where I just came from isn't the answer either." "Look," I began, "I've been here for a long time. I know what it's like here, and I also know that school doesn't have to be boring." Christopher looked doubtful at that point. "I mean it. I think if we're willing to do a little exploring, we could find that there's more to school than just sitting still and listening to a teacher go on and on." "Maybe," said Christopher as he thought it over. "Hey, why haven't you explored before now?" I knew he would ask that. I was afraid to tell him. I thought he might laugh at me, but I had to be honest. I don't like being in the dark alone, and I don't know where exploring will lead us. Christopher was quiet as he thought it over. He looked around again. Finally, he looked over at me and said, "I don't like shrinking or being bored. Let's explore." It wouldn't be easy, but making a friend helped. I couldn't be sure, but I thought Christopher and I were beginning, slowly, to grow. As we moved along, it was dark, but in the distance we could see the faintest of lights. There were noises too, voices, but we couldn't quite make out the words, and laughter that made us feel sad instead of happy. I almost stopped right then and there. I think Christopher was afraid too, but we had to keep going. We crawled toward the nearest light. You know, I expected it to get brighter as we got closer, but it didn't. It was a window covered with dirt and cobwebs. "Gross," said Christopher as he tried to wipe a spot clean enough to see through. Christopher squeezed himself against one side so that I could see too. We were outside of a classroom, and we didn't like what we saw. What's going on here? What are the kids doing in the class? Talking, right? Or here, what's going on here? What's going on?
Kids are
Falling asleep. Or here, okay? We looked in other windows where more students were shrinking and the teachers weren't having much fun either. "Christopher," I said once as we watched a group of students all staring at one blackboard, "does this remind you of anything?" "I don't think so. Why?" Christopher asked. "Because it reminds me of television. All those kids are just watching. No one is doing anything. I always liked to watch TV, but this was too much. Just watching even TV is pretty boring." Christopher smiled at me. "I think we are growing, Stella." "I think you're right, Christopher." We were growing too. When I first fell through the cracks, I thought the noises in the distance might be monsters. And I thought the lights beyond the shadows were raging fires. In other words, I thought the worst. But I was wrong. The monsters were fear and silence. The distant noises weren't so scary when we got closer. They were voices, students and teachers talking and planning together. We weren't used to so much talk in the classroom, not talk behind the teacher's back, but kids talking about their work and sharing ideas. Christopher and I began to seek out the brightest and loudest windows. A good thing too. We weren't so small anymore, and the brighter rooms had the biggest windows. Sometimes we couldn't believe it was school. "Stella, look at that class," Christopher pointed through a window, and it was amazing. I thought at first that it was art. Then I didn't know what to think. "What class is this?" I asked Christopher. "You know, I think it's history," he said, "but I never thought it could look like so much fun." That wasn't the only one. "What class is this?" asked Christopher. "Christopher, come over here. They're dancing." I had wandered to another window, another class, and we still couldn't believe it. "What class do you think this one is?" "What class?" You think so?
I was looking at the other one.
Oh. Look at the pond one.
The
class do you think there is art stuff going on, but what class do you think it is? Science. This class there is. I never thought I'd say this, but school isn't boring after all. Christopher was shaking his head as he spoke. If I were in there, I'm not sure what I'd do first. Christopher, I don't see a single shrinking student over here. I was looking in the English class at this point. No kidding, he asked as he hurried over. No kidding. It seemed we saw millions of ways to do things, to learn things. We saw all kinds of possibilities and all kinds of people with new and exciting ideas. Everyone was working together. Some people were good with numbers, others were good with words, and still others were good with pictures. Hey, Stella, something is happening. Christopher was right. The light was getting brighter, and I felt different. I think we're growing, Christopher. I think you're right, Stella. And it was true. Christopher and I found a way out of the darkness. We were no longer on the outside looking in. Christopher saw himself drawing and looking through a microscope, and he was back. And me? I taped an interview with my grandfather and was writing a historical narrative. I was back too. I like school now, and so does Christopher. We're not just watchers anymore, and we're thinking, not shrinking. This is where I live. Things look different? Better? Why do you think things got better? What do you think?
People were thinking and they were using their mind to do great things in the world.
Okay.